This is the Self-Taught or Not podcast with
Dylan Israel
and Erik Hanchett, where we teach you the do's and don'ts of software development from two software development professionals, one self-taught and one not.
Am I leading in? All right, I'm leading in. So today, Erik and I on Self-Taught or Not, your go-to software engineering podcast, we're going to be talking about writing a technical book. Something Erik has more experience than I have, but something that an endeavor that I am jumping into, which might be, pretty relevant because a lot of you probably aren't yet authors, but maybe have thought about it and want to understand some of the benefits and some of the challenges with just getting going.
Technical book writing sounds really scary to most people. They think that technical book writing is only for experts that are thought leaders in our world, and that, unless you have 10 years of experience and you're a really good writer, that you should never even think about this. But the truth of the matter is that there is tons of new authors are getting into this field. Lots of beginners are writing books. Lots of people, you don't have to be an expert. I think that's the first thing people worry about, that they have to be an expert to write a blog. Or I haven't mentioned blog, but we're actually talking about a book now. We just did an episode on blogging. To write a book. So what's really great about it is if you want to learn a topic really, really well, write a book about it, for sure. It gets your name out there. I've been able to open definitely some job opportunities and some other doors by having a book out there. And it's great for freelancing as well. So that might be some of the reasons you want to get into blog. It definitely raises your profile for the rest of your life. You can be like, I'm Erik Hanchett. I'm a published author. And you can kind of get that a little bit of an ego boost from that. But it's also just kind of a cool thing to have on your resume when you start going out there and talking to people.
Yeah, and I feel like the sort of, I don't know if I can be a technical author. It's so very similar to the, I thought just like geniuses were software developers sort of thing, where it's like, no, I mean, you just have to put a little bit of effort and energy into these things and make sure that you understand the concepts, and eventually you'll get there.
There is two types of books out there, type of book publishing. So there's self-published and traditional publishing. So let me just kind of go over the definitions of those two. Traditional book publishing is where you have an editor, you have accountability, and there's a publisher that actually publishes your book for you. So, and sometimes traditional books give you actual advertising, sometimes they don't. I know when I worked with Manning, they are really good at advertising your book to their list, to their people that are interested who buy Manning books. So that's really cool. It's also a guaranteed payment. So unlike self-publishing where you're not quite sure if people out there will actually buy your stuff, traditional books, you have an upfront advance that you get paid, and then you get royalties if you pay back that advance. And I'll explain a little bit more about that later. Self-publishing is where you are kind of doing everything yourself. So you are doing your editing of your book. There's no publisher involved, so that means you're going to have to find out where you're going to distribute your book to. A lot of times people just put it up on Amazon. You might sell it on your website. It can be a lot more money, but you don't have any guaranteed money. So in other words, whatever you can sell, you make money off of. So you're going to have to kind of be the guy that promotes the book. You're going to have to be the guy that tries to sell the book. If you build it, they will not come, unfortunately. So you're going to have a little bit of entrepreneurship on top of that. One other thing, deadlines. You're going to have to set your own deadlines. There's going to be no one kind of looking over your shoulder and making sure that you make them. And you have a lot more flexibility. So you can write a shorter book. You can write a longer book. You can probably not even edit your book and publish it.
Yeah, you can write the book that you want to write. Oftentimes when working with additional people on anything, there's sort of a give and take, and that can be a good and a bad thing. But, besides the money aspect, which can be better, I'm curious because I've talked to quite a few authors, and I know you've always worked with a publisher. So I take it you're pretty happy with that relationship.
Yeah. Before I started writing books, I had the worries of a lot of people who want to write books that once you start Googling technical book authors, you see a lot of horror stories of either authors that try to create a book and they had a terrible experience, or they didn't pay back their advance. But I've actually had pretty good. It's not perfect. There's some challenges, but I've had a pretty good outcome, and it's been good. I have a lot larger audience now than I had when I first started my book, so it's a harder decision for me now if I want to write another book. So that's a little bit of my thought behind it.
Yeah, and I kind of feel like that might play into it quite a bit, where if you have an audience that you can sell it to and you're going to take 100% of the profits versus, when you're working with every book deal is going to be different, but from the people I've talked to, you're looking anywhere from like a 7 to like a 20% on the high end of actual money that you're getting per sale with a publisher. So, if you have an audience to sell it to, self-publishing might be something that you're much more interested in.
So let's break down those numbers. That's a good transition. So first, let me tell you a little bit about some of the caveats and some of those numbers. So a technical book, creating any technical book, self-published, or if you're creating yourself, well, let's focus more on actually with a publisher. That the book usually takes 1 to 2 years to write. So if you're working with Manning, O'Reilly, Pact, usually doesn't matter who you're working with. It's going to take 1 to 2 years to work with them, and to actually get a book out the door. So it's quite a bit of time commitment. And honestly, it could take hundreds of hours if you break down the amount of money you get. If you have like a low royalty and a low advance, you might even make more money just working at McDonald's if you spend all that time. You would have no more skills. You would know a lot about how to make French fries.
Yeah, but the actual monetary coming in. But one caveat to that is the prestige that comes with it, right? So a lot of things come with it where you could, if you took like my YouTube channel, for instance, and average out the hours, I'm making, below minimum wage, I'd imagine, if over time. But you also have maybe a semi-passive income stream. You have more credibility, things like that from doing such a thing, which may raise your salary down the road.
There's the advances that you can get for a traditionally published book is usually between a couple thousand. Some of the larger authors can command up to $10,000. That's usually pretty rare. Usually somewhere between $2,000 to $7,000. That's the advance. That's definitely lower pay than for most developers. But as Dylan said, there's a lot of advantages, which we'll get to more of those in a second. The royalty rates are between 8% to 16%. Maybe you can get 20% if you're in a smaller niche publisher that'll let you have those type of rates. And the way advances work is you'll get this upfront advance. It could be like, let's say, $4,000. That advance is paid off as you hit certain milestones while you write the book. So if you, after the first 3 chapters, you might get the first 2,000. When you hit the next 4 chapters, you might get another 1,000. And then usually there's a final payment when you deliver the book. And that's kind of how that breaks down. Now, when I talk about advances, it's, as the name suggests, it's an advance on your earnings that you can make. So let's say it's $4,000 again, and you have a 10% royalty rate. Every book you sell, that 10% will go back to pay back the advance until you pay back the advance. And then at that point, you'll actually start earning money. Now, most technical books that I've heard of, that I've been told, only sell a few thousand copies. Unless it's a really breakout hit, unless you're talking about Cracking the Coding Interview, like that one sold tens of thousands of books. I know John Sonmez, he has a book called Simple Programmer, or he has a website called Simple Programmer, but he has the complete software development book that I think me and Dylan both own. I'm pretty sure that sold tens of thousands of copies. That's usually not the norm. And as Dylan said, it's usually not about the money, but keep that in mind when you start off with that. Some books don't even pay back the advance. You might only get that $4,000. You may never get any more money after that. And also, one other disadvantage to keep in mind is that there might be some people that think that writing a book is kind of hoity-toity, or they'll kind of put you down, and they think that you're not qualified enough because they've only heard that really amazing people write books and you're not one of them. I don't know. I've heard of stories of some people.
I mean, we can all sum that up as haters gonna hate. You know what I mean? Like, as yeah, in the I forget in the whatever that North Korea movie was, they hate us because they ain't us. You know, I mean, people are always going to shoot down people who are trying things and doing it because a lot of times they just don't want to confront the fact that they're not willing to try something and do it. So you know, don't let that dissuade you.
If I had taken all like the last 5 years, 10 years of my life and taken everybody's advice of what I shouldn't do, I would be still at my last job doing the same thing I've done and not, gotten anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, my story is very similar. Of if I stayed in school, I'd probably still be miserable. I'd still be broke. I wouldn't have, a house. I probably wouldn't be financially secure, and it'd be a very different time. And a lot of times people are speaking up about this and taking other advice. Most of the time, it's unsolicited advice. Most of the time, it's from people who aren't even like the people who I have people in my life to this day give me advice about software career who've never worked in software, have no understanding of the field, and just because they feel that they're entitled to. So there's always going to be people like that in your life, and as you grow up and mature, you're going to realize who are the people to listen to and who are not.
So let's talk about some pluses. We talked a little bit about kind of getting that credibility, which is great. Yeah, it leads to jobs and freelancing work, and you'll have that name published author by your name for the rest of your life. Okay, so how do we start? If you're like brand new, you're listening to this and like, I want to become an author. Let's do it. So first, you need to think of an interesting topic that you're passionate about, and then there's a couple of ways that you can get a book deal. One is you could just cold email some technical book publishers. I mean, so I think the most popular right now is O'Reilly, A-Press, Manning, Pact, No Starch Publishing. I think is getting bigger and bigger. People are talking about them. So those are a few. They're called acquisition editors or AEs. There's usually junior level and senior level acquisition editors. And those are the people, you might even be able to find them on LinkedIn. Those are the people you want to contact.
And if you do have sort of a social media presence, whether it's a blog or a YouTube channel, a lot of times I know Eric's got these offers, and so have I, where you're like, hey, we saw that you just built an Angular course. We'd love for you to do a book on Angular. And I haven't taken anybody up on it, but that might be a way for you. You're like, oh, the cold email is not work. Just build that sort of personal brand, and if you build it, they will come, sort of thing.
If you start putting stuff out on the internet, people will notice. And great ways, YouTube channel, like Dylan said, people will start contacting you. Blogs, same way. Blogs are really good because they already know that you could write. So they're going to contact you and follow up and see if you can get for you to write for them. I know some people kind of downplay it. They're like, well, if they're just contacting everybody that's created a book, created a blog article, is that really that special if you write a book? And I think it is special because I would say most people just say no.
Yeah, I'm exactly what I just said. Like, there's a difference between say no. There's a large portion of people that say no because they don't want to take on the challenge or the effort and energy. There's another large portion, I imagine, that start it and doesn't actually ever get past milestone 1 and never completes it and then continues on. And there's a very minute amount of people that go and actually finish it.
That's a big accomplishment. So after they contact you because you already have an online presence, or you kind of cold email them, you'll talk to an acquisition editor, and usually they're pretty frank with you. They'll tell you about, once you can get them on the phone or talk to them over Skype, they'll tell you what topics they're interested in and what topics they're not interested in. And sometimes that takes a little back and forth. Some topics, like right now, I would say that React is still really hot. If you want to create a really interesting React book that hasn't been written before, you're going to get a lot of positivity from that. If you're trying to create a book on Ember.js, which is a lot more niche, you're probably not going to easily be able to get topics on there. So the acquisition editors are always like looking for the latest and greatest. Like Svelte right now is getting a lot of popularity. I've seen a lot of people talk about Svelte, which is a JavaScript framework.
Every live stream, I get someone talking about it, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, another one!"
I bet you like book publishers are just. I bet there's a Svelte book for every book publisher coming out soon.
By January, there'll be 7 out.
Yeah, so that's getting a lot of attention right now. So keep an eye on that. And so once you and the acquisition editor come with a topic, they'll usually have you create a book proposal, which covers the topic that you want. And a book proposal, you can actually get professional editors to create book proposal. There's actually people out there that help you create book proposals professionally. And if you're really on point and you have a topic you're really passionate about, you can create this book proposal before you even talk to a publisher. And then you propose the book proposal to them. Technical books, I haven't seen that as often. Usually you kind of talk to your acquisition editor first, come up with a topic, and then you write the book proposal. So your mileage may vary. The book proposal, you'll go over the subject of the book, the summary of the book, some typical questions raised on the subject, the who the book is aimed at. You talk about the competition, the book size, estimates, page counts are important. You give them your contact details, a proposed schedule, and a table of contents. So it really covers all the things about the book that you need to cover. And a lot of book publishers have templates that they'll send you. Like, just fill this out, and then we'll think about it. Once you have the book proposal done, you send that back to the acquisition editor, and then sometimes they'll have you go in a meeting with a panel of experts, which will talk about the book proposal and tell you things they like about it, things they don't like about it, and they'll evaluate if the topic is something that they want to do. So this is kind of the first step. Sometimes they won't accept the book proposal, and you're done at that point. And then you go on. If you do say yes, then it goes on to the contract. So the contract is, so if you go through the acquisition editor and they approve your book proposal, then you kind of get into the negotiation part, and they'll usually send you their kind of blank, that's not the right word, their standard contract. If you're a first-time publisher, you're not going to have that much leeway and bargaining chips on what you can do in that. Usually if you have a few books, you have a little bit more, but it doesn't hurt to ask. You can always ask.
Yeah.
And so so you might want to read the contract carefully and talk, and maybe even if you have a friend or something, have them look it over if they're a lawyer.
Yeah, you're probably going to be not very happy, because again, you don't. It's sort of like your first dev job. You're not getting paid very well, but you might get something on the resume. I know that the book offers I've had when I very early on started my career were significantly worse than the book offers I get nowadays. But again, this is something that you're doing voluntarily, and if you really want to write a book, and you feel like maybe the publisher is just bending you over too much, you can always go to the self-published route.
You can always walk away. That's as to Dylan's point.
From those abusive relationships, whether it's significant others or book publishers, respect yourself. All right.
One little caveat. I think I found an article somewhere that gave me like 4 things to look for in a technical book publishing contract. One of which is you can always negotiate the advance and the royalty rates to a point. You can't get like 20% for most people, but also some of them have caveats that if you don't pay back the advance on your first book, that you have to pay it back on the second book. Try to avoid things like that. So once you get the contract signed, you guys are both happy. Usually it's like an electronic signature. They send you like to this website, you electronically sign it. You are then responsible to write the book. Usually most of them have caveats that if you want to, that both parties can leave at any time. So if they're not happy with you and you're not happy with them, either party can leave. So you're never like in indentured servitude or you have to get out of the contract. I've heard, have you heard these stories lately about these gaming companies like FaZe Clan that are offering ththese crazy contracts that are like 3 or 4 years and they take like half your revenue?
Yeah. And you're talking about like streamers and pro players and stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, people
It's
sign these
crazy.
things because I mean, here's the thing: is it's again this position of power of like, say you're an aspiring pro gamer and streamer, and you're going from scraping by, maybe you make $30,000 a year if you're lucky, and then you're like, hey, we're going to sign you for, we'll sign you for 3-4 years, but we're taking half, and we're going to pay you maybe X amount of dollars, but all your subscriptions. And at that very first year, as you're grinding, you're like, sweet. And then the second year, like, so they're making more money than me. This doesn't seem fair. I'm doing all the work. But I mean, this is sort of my issue with a lot of these contracts, and why I'm very much more pro self-publishing is you get you get taken advantage of, and because you're not negotiating from a position of power, because you don't have any, to be honest.
Anything in life, read the contract and beware of things where the other party's not doing anything and you're doing everything and they
Well,
get a chunk of money
yeah,
from you.
like the I'm very much so against networks on like YouTube, for instance. Like, how many people have had networks? Then YouTube canceled a bunch of them because they were taking advantage of people, and they're not necessarily in HOAs. God, I hate HOAs. Like, we can all these people that just trying to take a piece of the pie, and they don't really do much for it.
So when you get into that, after you got the contract signed, you go into the pre-writing process, and that's when you'll be assigned a development editor who essentially is like a babysitter for you. So they're kind of going to talk to you at least once, maybe once a week or once every other week. They're going to be reminding you of deadlines. They'll send you some documentation on like how you should write a book. This is how you should structure it. They'll give you the templates and how to write the book. And then you also usually be assigned a technical editor, which will look through every chapter that you write. After you assign a development editor, they'll usually want you to create what's called a chapter plan. So a chapter plan is, before you write the first chapter, you just kind of give an outline of what you're going to cover in the chapter, and then you send that to your development editor, who will just make sure it looks okay. And then you start writing the chapters for the book. So let me tell you a little bit about the writing process. So usually I like to prefer to just do one chapter in a whole like 8 1 or 2 day blocks. So I usually give myself all day Sunday or all day Saturday and Sunday to get something done. Sometimes I actually took time off of work just to write. And then when I wrote, I would just do a lot of practical examples. I would use this kind of imagine this scenario, like I'd want it to be like, this is how you would do it in the real world. And imagine if you wanted to do this, is kind of how I wrote it. A lot of explanations, a lot of showing. And one thing we always got to be aware of when you're writing a book is not just to try to rewrite the official documentation. Some parts might resemble that, but you really want to usually tie it into like a larger concept or a larger app that you're creating. You got to create a good schedule when you're writing. Like I said, I was working on writing on the weekends. And one thing that I didn't realize when I first started writing books, I actually wrote 2 books. My first book was through Pact Publishing, which I'm going to just admit, they're an okay publisher. Maybe they're good for like a first time publisher, but I think the quality wasn't as good as it could have been. I know that, Dylan, you've dealt with Pact before, and
Yeah, they're pains in the ass. I'll never work with that.
my second book was Manning, and to the point I was getting to was that Manning was really good. Pact didn't really care as much on the standards. They had a technical editor and everything, but Pact was really, really hardcore about having a very high quality book, and they also had graphics. And so I'm not much of a graphics guy, but it was kind of required that you created graphics in the book, illustrations, at least screenshots and illustrations. And that's something, if you're like me, who doesn't have much of a background in that, that was really difficult. So keep that in mind. But I would focus on writing the book first and then try to weave in as many graphics and illustrations as you can.
Yeah, and I think your point about making sure not to rewrite the official docs for things was a very good one. If we've all had to go through documentation, and oftentimes, no matter what technology it is, it's not the best. It's not as descriptive as it needs to be, and doesn't usually provide real world examples, which if it did a fantastic job, there'd be no need for like books and courses, but there is a huge demand for it because most documentation doesn't do the best or not as in depth as it need to be. So definitely make sure you adhere to that point.
I had a really hard point when I was writing my Vue book, Vue.js in Action, which is the book I wrote with Manning. The actual Vue documentation is pretty darn good
Mm-hmm.
for it. So it was hard. Like I was worried that people would think, oh, this is just another rehash of the official documentation. So I took a lot of time of like trying to think of how I can create more creative examples, how I can teach these topics different than the official documentation. Although I did use the official documentation as inspiration on a lot of different parts.
Yeah,
That
one
kind of
thing
helped write some of the beginning chapters.
One thing that's particularly cool about the Vue docs, I don't know if it's still the case, but when I was going through it, I saw my boy. Oh, it is nice. My boys over at Scrimba, they actually went and did a bunch of Scrimba tutorials, and it's in the actual Vue documentation, which I thought was really cool, and I was like, good on them.
Yeah, very cool. And then, so once you have gotten your chapter written, assume that you're going to be doing a lot of revisions. So usually after you have the chapter written, it gets to the development editor who shall edit it. And then you'll have to make the revisions on the revised document. And then it gets to a technical editor and they'll revise it and send it back to you. So I think like my first 3 or 4 chapters, I think my first chapter had like 40 or 50 revisions on it. It takes that many times because I went back and forth a ton of times, the editor and technical editor, and they might go back through it 2 or 3 times, especially the first few chapters, because they know that it takes a while for you to get it. And usually the way it works with the revisions is, at least in my case, I had a Google or a Word document, and then I turned on the feature where you can leave comments. And then I would just leave that feature on, and they would go and leave comments. I would correct all the comments, send it back to them. They'd leave more comments, and we would go back and forth a few times. And then later on in the book process too, you do even more. So after you go through, like, they usually split the book into 3. This is how Manning does it. Other publishers might be different. There's usually 3 sections. There's a kind of a beginning section, beginning chapters, middle chapters, and end chapters. And then at the end of maybe after 3 or 4 chapters, you'll have an official review. So that in that case, they get 10 or 15 reviewers, like industry experts, who will then read the first 3 or 4 chapters of your book and then give you feedback on that. And you get drowned, and you'll drown in feedback from these reviewers. So they'll be like, some people won't like this section, some people will see an obvious error in this section, and they do it 3 times, and then I think they do a 4th time at the end of the book. So you'll be going back and revising and getting these chapters done a lot better. They'll be a lot better at the end, but it's just a ton of work and revisions. You also get feedback from forums. One thing that's nice about Manning is they have the Manning Early Access program. So once you start, after you get 3 or 4 chapters written, they'll put it up on the Early Access program, and that means anybody on who basically just visits the Manning website can buy your book, knowing that it's not completed, and that they'll get updates as new chapters come out. And then as an early access buyer, they get access to a forum, which then they can kind of give you feedback and let you know what they like about the book and what they don't like about the book, and also let you know of any errors. So that was like really instrumental. I had 2 or 3 really good forum users that would give me tons of feedback in each chapter and what they liked and didn't like. And I really appreciated that. It's really hard when you're getting all this feedback, when you're getting between the official every 3 months or every 3 or 4 chapter feedback, the forum feedback, feedback from your technical editor and the development editor. It's hard to figure out which ones you should keep and which ones you shouldn't. There's actually plenty of things I thought of and you know what, my example is fine. I'm not going to change it. And you're just going to have to be good at not giving everybody a chance to, they're not making a change every time anyone complains. And I guess I'm just going to wrap this up. So after you get through this gauntlet of feedback on every single chapter and all this reviewer feedback, you'll get to the stage where your book will be done. And it's not really done at that point. It still needs to be laid out and put together. And this is the point. It's called production. They call it production period, where the book is written, but they need to actually get it to the printers and get them done and basically call the book done. And this is the point where hopefully all the graphics and everything you have Illustrator files and Adobe files for each one of those that you can send to the production people to get the book done. I actually had a problem with this. Some of my screenshots weren't high enough quality at the end of the book. I had to go back and redo some of them. I guess that's it happens quite often. You'll send all the information to the production people. It takes sometimes between 3 to 6 months after you're done with the book for them to actually finish the production and then get it printed. And then there's a lot of little details in that part, and then you'll be done, and the book will be out, and they'll send you a bunch of copies. You can give to friends and family, and you feel good about yourself. That is in the nutshell of the book writing process for a publisher.
One more question, as someone
Sure.
who had to go through this and has written books before, is what about versioning? So like you then update a additional version. Is that typically in the contract? How does that usually play out?
So if you need like a second edition or updates to it,
second edition, third edition.
So once you go through production and your book's out, there's no changes you can do to the actual book itself. So it's kind of set in stone at that point. You do have, at least on Manning, they have something called Live Book, where your book can be up on this platform that if people have bought the book, they get access to it, and you can leave comments. So if something changed, you can leave a comment and people will see that. People can also leave comments saying if they had any bugs or problems or errors. You can also have a GitHub. This is what I did. All the code for my book is on GitHub, so I occasionally go in there and update it if something breaks. I only had to do it a couple of times. Or if someone finds a bug. That's one thing. My book, even after all that editing and all those revisions, I still had a few typos in the book, which I was really upset about. Well, not really. I was just kind of disappointed that made it through the process. And I also had like 1 or 2 sections in the book where the code example was missing something. It's pretty minor, but still, like, how did that get through? I don't know. And I added basically an errata and to the documentation and to the live book. I said, well, by the way, this got missed, and everybody was okay. And then I made sure it was correct in GitHub. Now, if you want to create like a new edition, you have to start the process all over again. You have to talk back to your acquisition editor. You have to create a new book proposal, and you have to go through that whole process again. And usually you can actually reuse parts of the older book and then update it, so it's a little bit quicker process. But it's still probably going to take over a year.
Whew. I wasn't expecting that. I thought it was going to be like, no, we just fixed a few things. That's cool. Good to go.
No, usually they like to, you're basically creating a brand new book, which you can reuse some parts of the older book on. Okie dokie. Well, I hope you guys thought that was interesting. That was a brain dump of me on books. Let me know.
Yep. Sounds good. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you want to find more about what I'm up to, go to dylanisrael.com.
And if you want to know what I'm up to, you can check out my website at erik.video. If you haven't already, please leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. It really helps us out. And if you do, you might even be featured on our next episode. Don't forget to check out the website at selftaughtornot.com. From there, you can sign up for a mailing list where we give away free courses and a bunch of cool stuff. And we'll also let you know when the next episode comes out. And finally, if you didn't know, we have a Facebook group. It's called Code, Tech, and Caffeine. We have over 10,000 members, and you can find the link at selftaughtornot.com. So come join us. We have tons of developers willing to help you guys, mentor you guys. Check it out. Just make sure you go to selftaughtornot.com and check out the Code, Tech, and Caffeine link. Thanks, and take care.